The night before my retirement trip, my grandson called me out of nowhere and said, "Grandpa, hide a camera in the living room and get out of the apartment tonight. Do not go back." I was a 60-year-old engineer. I had built things my entire life. I trusted the foundation beneath me without ever thinking to check it. So I did exactly what he said. And what I saw on that screen the next morning made me realize that the person I had trusted most had been quietly dismantling everything I had spent 35 years building. I'm incredibly grateful you are here. To help us connect, please comment below with your city or country. Also note that this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or locations is coincidental, but the message I'm sharing is highly useful. I used to think a man could measure his life by what he built. Not the square footage of the buildings, not the tensile strength of the steel beams, not the load-bearing calculations I had run 10,000 times over 35 years as a structural engineer. I mean the other things, the things you cannot put on a blueprint, the marriage that was supposed to last, the home that was supposed to be a sanctuary, the retirement that was supposed to feel like arriving somewhere, not like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering how you got there. My name is Arthur Vance. I am 60 years old, and until about 3 months ago, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of city that does not ask too much of you as long as you are willing to work. My father poured concrete for a living. His father before him swung a hammer on the railroad. Hard work was not a philosophy in our family. It was simply the air we breathed. By the time I was 22, I had my engineering degree from Ohio State and a job with Hendricks in coal construction that I would keep in one form or another for the rest of my working life. I met Eleanor at a company picnic in the summer of 1998. She was wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at something a colleague had said, and I remember thinking that I had never heard a laugh quite like hers. Unguarded, unself-conscious. The kind of laugh that made you want to say something funny just to hear it again. We were married within 2 years. We bought a 2-bedroom condo on the east side of Columbus on a quiet street lined with oak trees that turned spectacular shades of amber every October. We signed a 20-year mortgage, and I remember the weight of that pen in my hand, the way my signature looked on that final page. Solid, committed, like something that could not be undone. And last February, we made the final payment. I remember the day I sat down at the kitchen table with the payoff letter from the bank, that single sheet of paper confirming that the condo was ours, fully completely without a lien or a lender between us and the deed. I had poured coffee, set the letter flat on the table, and just looked at it for a long moment. 35 years of early mornings and late nights and weekends on job sites in Dayton and Cincinnati, and once memorably a brutal February in Cleveland where the wind came off Lake Erie like a punishment. And here was the result. 4 walls and a roof that belonged to us. Eleanor had glanced over from the counter where she was scrolling through her phone and smiled. "That's wonderful, Arthur," she said. Then she went back to her phone. I told myself that was fine. People show happiness differently. Eleanor had never been the type to make a fuss. She was practical, efficient. She had managed our household finances for years with the same brisk competence she brought to everything else, and I had been grateful for it. Running numbers on construction projects all day left me with little appetite for balancing accounts at night. Eleanor handled the credit cards, the utility bills, the insurance premiums, the quarterly transfers into our retirement fund. I trusted her completely. I want to be clear about that. I trusted her the way you trust the foundation beneath a building. You do not check it every morning. You simply assume it is holding. That evening, the evening I am telling you about, was a Tuesday in late May. The kind of spring evening in Ohio, when the air finally decides to be warm without apology, when you can leave the windows open and hear the neighbors' kids riding their bikes on the sidewalk below. I had come home from a job site in Worthington, where we were finishing up a commercial renovation, and my back ached the way it always did after a long day on my feet. I showered, heated up the leftover pot, roast Eleanor had made 2 nights before, and sat down at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the evening quiet. Eleanor appeared in the hallway around 6:30, dressed in a dark blazer and slacks, her hair pinned back the way she wore it when she went out. She was carrying her good purse, the leather one. Not the everyday bag she used for the grocery store. "Charity board meeting tonight," she said, not quite looking at me. "I told you last week, might run late." "Sure," I said. "Drive safe." She paused at the door, and something made me look up from my plate. She was smiling at me. It was a perfectly normal smile, the kind of smile a wife of 25 years gives her husband on a Tuesday evening. Nothing unusual about it, nothing wrong, except that it did not reach her eyes. I had seen Eleanor smile 10,000 times. I knew the real one. The way the corners of her eyes crinkled when something genuinely delighted her, the way her whole face seemed to open up. This smile was something else. It was a performance, competent and practiced and completely hollow underneath. She pulled the door closed behind her, and I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, listening to the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway toward the elevator. The pot roast went cold on the plate. I did not finish it. I sat there in the kitchen for a long time, after she left, not reading, not watching television, just sitting with a low, uncomfortable feeling I could not name. It was the kind of feeling I sometimes got on a job site when something looked structurally sound on paper, but felt wrong when you walked the floor, a vibration in your gut that the instruments had not caught yet. An engineer's instinct, maybe, or just an old man's loneliness finally refusing to be quiet. I washed my dish. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, where the oak trees were just beginning to fill out with their summer leaves. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up expecting a text from the site foreman about the Worthington job. It was from Logan. "Grandpa, are you home alone tonight? I need to talk to you, not over the phone." I read the message 3 times, not because the words were complicated. They were not. 11 words plain and direct, the way Logan always was. But there was something about the specific combination of them that made my chest tighten in a way I could not immediately explain. "I need to talk to you, not over the phone." Logan was 19 years old, my son Daniel's boy. And he was not the kind of kid who said things for dramatic effect. He was not dramatic at all. He was quiet in the way that very sharp people are sometimes quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from spending more time thinking than talking. When Logan spoke, you listened because he had usually already considered the matter from 6 different angles before opening his mouth. I typed back, "Front door's unlocked. Come whenever." He arrived 20 minutes later. I heard the elevator. Then his knock 2 firm taps the way he always did it. I opened the door, and there he was, tall and lean, in a gray Ohio State hoodie, his dark hair a little damp, like he had showered before coming over. He was carrying his backpack, the beat-up olive green one he took everywhere, and his jaw was set in a way that made him look older than 19. "Hey, Grandpa." He stepped inside, glanced around the apartment the way you do when you're checking whether someone else is home. "She's at a meeting," I said. "Won't be back until late." He nodded, and something in his shoulders dropped just slightly, like a tension he had been holding on the drive over. That small release told me more than anything he had said so far. "Sit down," I said. "You want coffee?" "No, sir." He set his backpack on the kitchen chair and stayed standing for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for about 3 weeks now. I kept telling myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was reading too much into it. "Logan," I kept my voice steady. "Just say it." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, elbows on the table, hands clasped together. He looked me straight in the eye the way his father had taught him to do when something mattered. "About 3 weeks ago," he said, "I was at Easton Town Center with a couple of friends. We were just walking around, nothing serious, and I saw Grandma Eleanor coming out of the watch store, the one near the Nordstrom entrance. I waited. She was carrying one of those dark gift bags." Logan continued, his voice careful and measured. "You know the kind, the ones they put the boxes in when you buy something expensive. I almost called out to her, but something made me stop. I don't know why, just a feeling." He paused. "She walked out to the parking deck on the 2nd level. I followed her maybe 30 feet back. She didn't see me." The kitchen felt very still. "There was a car waiting," Logan said. "A black Audi, A6, maybe 2 or 3 years old, nice condition. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. She walked up to the passenger window, reached through and handed him the bag. He opened it right there in the car, took the box out, opened it, put on the watch." Logan's jaw tightened. Then she leaned in through the window and kissed him. I did not move. I was aware of the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of the television from the apartment next door, the way the kitchen light made everything look too bright and too sharp. "How old?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "Maybe mid-30s, Logan said. "Well-dressed, hair slicked back, the kind of guy who looks like he spends money to look like he spends money." He exhaled. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I stood there for probably 2 full minutes just trying to convince myself I had misread the whole thing, but I hadn't. I looked down at my hands on the table. The knuckles were thick from years of work, the skin a little loose the way skin gets at 60. I had built things with these hands, poured my whole working life into providing for this apartment, this marriage, this future we were supposed to be stepping into together. "You said you've been sitting on this for 3 weeks, I said. "Yes, sir." Logan's voice carried a weight that had no business being in a 19-year-old. After that day, I started paying closer attention. I noticed she was going out more than usual, different nights, different excuses, and then I started looking at some other things. He hesitated. "Grandpa, you gave me read access to the household email account last year, remember? When you needed help setting up the new router and you couldn't remember the password." I remembered. "I went back through some of the statements that come in by email," Logan said. "Bank notifications, credit card summaries." He looked at me steadily. The numbers didn't look right to me. There were transfers and charges I couldn't account for. Bigger ones, going back further than just the last few weeks. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street below. I had handed Eleanor our financial life 20 years ago without a second thought. She was organized, detail-oriented, better with numbers than she ever gave herself credit for. Every month, the bills were paid, the accounts were maintained, the retirement contributions went through on schedule. Or so I had believed. I had never once sat down and audited the statements myself. I had been too tired, too trusting, too certain that the foundation was solid to bother checking it. "How bad?" I asked. Logan reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder. He set it on the table between us, but he did not open it yet. He just rested his hand on top of it. "There's more I need to show you," he said. "But Grandpa, before I do, I need you to promise me something. I need you to promise me you won't do anything tonight until we've talked all the way through it. Because if you go in half-informed and angry, she'll cover her tracks and we'll lose the chance to do this right." I looked at my grandson across the kitchen table. At the steadiness in his eyes and the grief underneath it, the grief of a young man who had discovered something terrible and spent 3 weeks carrying it alone because he was trying to protect me. "I promise," I said. He opened the folder. The folder held maybe 30 pages. Logan had printed everything out, organized it into sections with small handwritten labels on sticky notes the way his father did when he was preparing for something important. I recognized the habit. Daniel had always been a careful man. Apparently, it ran in the family. "I want to walk you through this in order," Logan said, "starting from the oldest and working forward. That way you can see how it built up over time." I nodded. My hands were flat on the table. I was making a conscious effort to keep them still. The first section was a series of email notifications from our joint checking account. Logan had highlighted specific lines in yellow. Transfers to an external account, the same routing number appearing again and again, amounts ranging from $800 to $2,200, spaced out every 3 to 4 weeks, going back 11 months. "This external account," Logan said, tapping the page. "It's not a utility company, not an insurance provider, not any vendor I could match to a normal household expense. I cross-referenced every payee I could find against your regular bills. This one doesn't match anything legitimate." I stared at the highlighted figures. 11 months. While I had been driving to job sites in Worthington and Dayton and Dublin, while I had been reviewing structural load calculations and arguing with subcontractors about poor schedules, someone had been pulling money out of the account I had spent 35 years filling. "How much total?" I asked. Logan turned to the last page of that section. He had written a figure at the bottom, in red pen circled twice. $19,400. The number sat between us on the table like something physical, like a stone dropped into still water. I breathed in slowly through my nose. I was an engineer. I dealt in facts and figures. I told myself to treat this the same way I would treat a structural failure report. Identify the problem, quantify the damage, find the cause. "Keep going," I said. The second section was credit card statements. Eleanor had 2 cards under her name on our joint account, one primary and one she had described years ago as a backup for emergencies. Logan had pulled the summary notifications that came through the shared email. He pointed to a pattern of charges that stood out from the normal grocery runs and pharmacy visits. Restaurant charges at places I had never heard of and never been to. a recurring monthly charge to a downtown parking garage I could not place, 2 separate charges from a luxury car rental service totaling just over $3,000 across 4 months. She told you she was driving her own car to those charity meetings, Logan said quietly. It was not a question. She did, I said. She rented a car 11 times in the past 8 months. Logan's voice stayed level, but his jaw was tight. A different car each time. I looked up the rental company. They specialize in high-end vehicles, Mercedes B, MW, that category. I thought about Eleanor in her dark blazer carrying her good leather purse telling me she would be home late. I thought about how many times I had said drive safe without ever once thinking to ask what she was driving. The third section was the one that made my vision blur at the edges. Logan had printed out a document he had found in the shared email drafts folder, not sent, saved as a draft. It was a property transfer form, the kind used in Franklin County to initiate the process of adding or removing a name from a real estate deed. Our address was printed at the top. My name was listed as the current owner alongside Eleanor's. And in the field for the name being added as a new joint owner typed in clean 12-point font was a name I did not recognize. Julian Mercer. Who is he? My voice came out harder than I intended. That's the man from the parking deck, Logan said. The one she gave the watch to. I found his name on a LinkedIn profile that matched the physical description. He works in marketing, mid-30s, lives in an apartment in the Short North neighborhood. Logan paused. Grandpa, I think this document was being prepared to add him to the deed of your condo, your paid-off condo. The condo I had spent 20 years paying down. The condo I had sat with the payoff letter on the kitchen table just 3 months ago, feeling like I had finally arrived somewhere solid after a lifetime of work. My throat tightened until it ached. She hasn't filed it yet, Logan said quickly. I checked the Franklin County Recorder's Office website. No transfer has been recorded, but the document exists, and based on everything else here, I don't think she was preparing it as a theoretical exercise. I pushed back from the table and stood up. Not because I was going anywhere, just because I needed to feel my feet on the floor, needed the physical sensation of being upright and solid in a room that felt like it was tilting. Grandpa, Logan's voice was careful. I know what you want to do right now. I know the feeling. But if you call her or confront her tonight, she'll know we've been looking. She'll move fast. She'll find a way to complete that transfer, or she'll drain whatever's left in the accounts before we can stop her. We need to be smarter than that. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark street below. The oak trees were just shadows now, against the yellow glow of the streetlights. I had planted one of those trees myself, 22 years ago, on an Arbor Day weekend, when the city offered free saplings, and I had dragged Eleanor out with a shovel and a 5-gallon bucket. She had laughed that day, a real laugh, the kind that reached her eyes. I turned back to face my grandson. What do we do? I asked. Logan straightened in his chair. Something shifted in his expression. The grief was still there, but underneath it was something steadier, something that looked very much like resolve. There's more I need to show you first, he said. And then we make a plan. Logan reached into the folder and produced a single printed page. It was a travel confirmation email. 2 names at the top, Arthur Vance and Eleanor Vance. Departure from John Glenn Columbus International Airport, bound for Istanbul, Turkey, with a connection in Newark. 7 nights at a 5-star hotel on the Bosphorus. Total charge $4,860. Payment method, the credit card ending in the 4 digits I recognized as Eleanor's backup emergency card. I had seen this email before. Eleanor had forwarded it to me 6 weeks ago with a short message attached. Surprise sweetheart, merry early retirement. I booked us something special. I had read it standing in the parking lot of the Worthington job site still in my hard hat, and I had felt something warm move through my chest. Something I had not felt in a long time. The sense that she still thought about us. That there was still an us worth thinking about. I had thanked her that evening over dinner. She had smiled and touched my hand across the table and said she wanted us to have something to look forward to. When was this charged to the card? I asked Logan, though. I already suspected the answer. He pointed to a date stamp in the corner of the page. Then he set another document beside it. A bank notification showing a large transfer out of our joint savings account. Same date. 4 days after that transfer had cleared, the travel charge appeared on the credit card statement. She moved money from savings into the checking account to pay down the card balance that month, Logan said. It made the credit card statement look normal on the surface. The savings account notification came through a separate email that probably got buried. I only caught it because I was specifically looking for patterns. I sat back down in my chair. The confirmation email lay on the table in front of me, that cheerful header with the airline logo, the hotel name printed in elegant script, a 5-star property overlooking the Bosphorus. The kind of trip I had never taken Eleanor on because there had always been a mortgage payment, a car repair, a reason to wait until later. She had booked it with money she had already taken from me, and she had presented it as a gift. She needed to buy time, Logan said. His voice was not unkind, but it was direct. Based on the timeline of the documents I found, the property transfer draft was created around the same period. My best guess is she was close to having everything in place to complete the deed transfer, but she needed you calm and distracted for a few more weeks. A romantic trip to Turkey was a very effective way to do that. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose. The headache that had been building since Logan knocked on my door was settling in behind my eyes with serious intent. She used my retirement savings, I said, to book a vacation, to keep me from noticing she was stealing my retirement savings. Yes, sir, Logan said. That's exactly what she did. There was something almost architectural about it, I thought distantly. The way a poorly constructed building could look sound from the outside for years, every surface painted and finished, every visible joint sealed while underneath the load-bearing elements were quietly compromised. You did not know until the day something shifted and the whole thing came down. I had spent my career learning to find those hidden failures before they became disasters. I had walked 1,000 job sites with my eyes trained to catch what was wrong beneath what looked right. And in my own home, in my own marriage, I had missed every single sign. Logan, I said, how long have you been carrying this? He looked at the table for a moment. 3 weeks since the parking deck, but I wanted to be sure before I came to you. I didn't want to bring you something half-built. He paused. I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept looking for the innocent explanation. I went back through 6 months of statements, then 8 months, then 11. Every time I thought maybe I had misread it, I found something else that confirmed it. 3 weeks. My 19-year-old grandson had spent 3 weeks sitting on this alone, going through financial records in his dorm room or at his parents' kitchen table, trying to find a way to tell his grandfather that the woman he had been married to for 25 years was systematically dismantling everything he had worked for. Does your father know? I asked. No, Logan said. I wanted to come to you first. It's your life, Grandpa. You deserve to hear it before anyone else. I looked at him across the table, at the dark circles under his eyes that I had not noticed when he first walked in, the particular exhaustion of someone who had been sleeping badly for weeks. He had done all of this for me, quietly, carefully, methodically, the way he did everything. He had protected me the best way he knew how, which was to arm me with the truth before anyone could use my ignorance against me. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. There's one more thing, Logan said. He pulled the last document from the folder, and this one is the worst. He placed it on the table and smoothed it flat with his palm. It was a photograph printed on plain copy paper, slightly grainy the way screenshots always were. A still image pulled from the security camera footage of our building's parking garage. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks prior, a Tuesday afternoon, the day I had been on site in Dayton. A man was walking through the garage toward the elevator that led up to our floor. Tall, well-dressed, dark hair slicked back. He was carrying nothing. He walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had been there before. He came into the building, I said. He went up to your floor, Logan said. I pulled the footage timestamp and cross-referenced it with the key fob entry log for your unit. Grandpa, someone used a key to enter your apartment that afternoon. Your spare key. The room went very quiet around me. He was inside my home, I said. Before I reveal what happens next, comment 1. So I know you're still here with Arthur. Also, please note, this story contains dramatized elements for creative purposes. If this isn't the content you're looking for, feel free to skip the video right now. Those 5 words sat in my chest like a piece of broken rebar. He was inside my home. I had built things my entire career. I understood at a level most people never needed to think about what it meant for a structure to be violated. A load-bearing wall cut through carelessly, a foundation drilled into without proper survey. The damage was not always visible immediately. Sometimes it took Weeks, months before the settling began, before the hairline cracks appeared in the plaster, and the doors stopped closing flush, and you finally understood that something essential had been compromised. I pushed back from the table and stood up again. This time, I walked to the living room because I needed to move, or I was going to put my fist through the kitchen wall, and I had enough of my engineer's brain left to know that would accomplish nothing except a trip to urgent care and a drywall repair bill. Logan followed me to the doorway and leaned against the frame, watching me carefully. "Tell me exactly what he was looking for," I said. "The security footage showed him on your floor for 41 minutes, Logan said. "I can't tell you with certainty what he did inside the unit because the building cameras only cover common areas. But based on the property transfer document I found in the email drafts, I think he was looking for the original deed to the condo. In Ohio, when you pay off a mortgage, the lending bank releases the lien and the deed is recorded with the county. The physical copy, the actual paper document with the official county recorder's stamp, typically gets mailed to the homeowner. I knew exactly where mine was. It was in the small fireproof lockbox I kept on the shelf in the bedroom closet, along with our social security cards, birth certificates, and the savings bonds my mother had given me when I turned 30. Eleanor knew where that lockbox was. She had known for 20 years. She gave him the spare key, I said. It was not a question. "That's my conclusion," Logan said. "The key fob system logs every entry. Your unit was accessed at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. You were in Dayton. Eleanor's car was not in the building garage that day. I checked the parking log. Someone used a key." I stood in the middle of my own living room and looked at the space around me the way I had not looked at it in years. The couch Eleanor had picked out. The side table I had assembled on a Saturday morning 8 years ago while she read the newspaper and handed me screws. The frame photograph on the wall from our 20th anniversary trip to Gatlinburg, the two of us standing on a trail, overlooked with the Smoky Mountains behind us, both of us squinting into the sun and smiling. I had been happy in that photograph, genuinely uncomplicatedly happy. I remembered the morning it was taken, the way the air smelled of pine and wood smoke, the way Eleanor had tucked her hand into my arm on the trail and leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. Had any of it been real, or had I been the only one who meant it? "Grandpa," Logan's voice cut through the spiral. "I need you to stay with me right now. We're not done." I turned to face him. My jaw ached from clenching it. "There's something else I found," he said. "Something I almost missed because it was buried in a subfolder of the email drafts. A document titled Research Grant Application." He went back to the kitchen and came back with the last pages from the folder. He held them out to me, and I took them, though my hands were not entirely steady. It was a 2-page document. The header read, Franklin County Arts and Community Foundation Grant Application, and the content looked at first glance like exactly what the title suggested. A funding application for a community research initiative. Dense paragraphs, official-looking, formatting, the kind of document you would skim without reading carefully if someone handed it to you in a stack of papers. But on the second page, buried in the signature block at the bottom, was my name, Arthur James Vance, and beside it a signature line. "This isn't a grant application," Logan said quietly. "Read the second paragraph on page 1, the actual operative language." I read it. Then I read it again. Beneath the innocuous heading about community research, the paragraph contained legal transfer language, specific, precise, unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were reading. It authorized the transfer of intellectual property rights and co-ownership interest in any real property held jointly by the undersigned to Julian Mercer, effective upon notarization. It was a property rights transfer document dressed up in the costume of a grant application. "She was going to have me sign this," I said. "I think she already tried once," Logan said. "Look at the bottom of page 2. I turned the page. There was a faint impression on the paper, the ghost of a signature, as though someone had signed a page on top of this one, and the pen pressure had transferred through. The impression was not complete enough to be legally valid, but it was there, my own handwriting, my own name, pressed into a document I had never knowingly seen. "I think she put this under something else you signed," Logan said. "Maybe a few months ago, the impression didn't transfer cleanly enough to use, so she kept the document and was waiting for another opportunity." The broken rebar feeling in my chest twisted sharply. "Logan," I said, my voice came out very low. "I want to go over there right now, and I want to—" "I know," he said firmly, "and that is exactly what she's counting on. Grandpa, please, sit down. because what I'm about to suggest is going to feel too calm for what you're feeling right now. But it's the only way we actually win this. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard through my nose, the forged document in my trembling hands. Then I sat down. "Talk," I said. Logan sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. For a moment, he looked less like a 19-year-old college student and more like a man twice his age, someone who had spent years thinking through difficult problems in difficult rooms. I recognized the posture. I had sat that way myself, across from clients and contractors, when I needed someone to trust me with something important. "Here is what I think we need to do," he said, "and I want you to hear all of it before you say anything." I nodded. "We need evidence that isn't just financial records and security camera stills," Logan said. "Documents can be disputed. A good attorney can argue that financial transfers were authorized, that the property document was a draft that was never acted on, that the key fob log is inconclusive. Eleanor is smart, Grandpa. If we walk into a lawyer's office or a police station tomorrow with what we have right now, she will have an explanation for every single piece of it." He was right, and I knew it. I had seen enough contract disputes in my career to understand how paper evidence could be twisted by someone determined to twist it. A stack of documents was only as strong as the story you could build around it. "What we need," Logan continued, "is something undeniable, something that shows intent and action together in the same frame with no room for interpretation." "You want a catcher in the act," I said. "Yes, sir." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small cardboard box I had not noticed before. He set it on the table and pushed it toward me. Inside, nestled in a fold of bubble wrap, was a compact wireless camera, roughly the size of a golf ball, matte black, with a wide-angle lens no bigger than a shirt button. "This connects to an app on your phone. Motion-activated night vision, capable live feed and cloud recording simultaneously. I bought it 3 weeks ago when I first started putting the pieces together." I picked it up and turned it in my hands. It was lighter than I expected. "I've been watching Eleanor's pattern," Logan said. "She goes out Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She's told you charity meetings, book club, dance, fitness class. Based on the location data from the building entry logs and the credit card charges at restaurants in the short north, I believe she's been spending those evenings with Julian." He paused. "But she's never brought him here, not while you were home anyway. Tonight she left at 6:30. You said she won't be back until late." "That's what she said." "I think tonight or very soon she will bring him back here." Logan's voice was steady. "She's close to completing the transfer. The document is ready. She just needs your signature or a convincing forgery. I think she's going to make her move soon, and I think she'll bring Julian here to finalize things when she believes the apartment is empty and she has time." I set the camera down on the table between us. "You want me to place this in the apartment," I said, "and then leave?" "Yes. Tonight after we're done talking, I want you to go back in, find a concealed position with a clear sight line to the living room and the front door, and place the camera. Then you come to my parents' house and you stay there." He met my eyes. "Whatever the camera records tonight belongs to you, Grandpa. It's your home, your property. Recording inside your own residence is completely legal in Ohio, even without the other party's knowledge, as long as you are the property owner and at least one party to any conversation consents to the recording. You are that party." I absorbed that. I had not known the specific legal standard, but it made sense. Ohio operated under what attorneys called a one-party consent rule for recordings made on private property. Logan had done his homework. "And if she doesn't come tonight?" I asked. "Then we wait," Logan said simply. "The camera stays in place. You stay at my parents' house as long as it takes. We tell Eleanor you got called to an emergency site inspection out of town, if she asks." I looked at the small black camera on the table. Outside the window, the Columbus night was quiet and ordinary, the same street I had looked at for 22 years. The oak tree I had planted was a dark shape against the amber glow of the streetlights. I thought about Eleanor's smile as she left tonight, the practiced hollow performance of it. I thought about Julian's ghost signature pressed into a document I had never knowingly touched. I thought about 41 minutes. A stranger in my home for 41 minutes, moving through the rooms I had paid for, with 35 years of my life, looking for the one piece of paper that would let him take it all. Something cold and very clear settled in my chest. Not rage, not grief. Something more like the feeling I got when I finally identified the source of a structural failure after weeks of investigation. The peculiar calm of understanding exactly what had gone wrong and exactly what needed to happen next. "There's a ficus in the corner of the living room," I said. "The big one by the window. The branches are dense enough near the base that you can't see into them from across the room." Logan looked at me steadily. "That'll work." I picked up the camera and stood up. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, I said. "Then I'll follow you to your parents' house." Logan stood as well, and for a moment neither of us said anything, because there was nothing left to say that the situation had not already said for us. Then he reached out and put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the way his father sometimes did, the way men in our family had always communicated the things that words made clumsy. I walked back into my apartment for what I did not yet know would be the last time I entered it as a man who still believed in his marriage. The ficus stood in the corner, by the window, broad-leafed and indifferent, the way plants always are to the human dramas unfolding around them. I crouched down, parted the lower branches carefully, and nestled the camera into the gap where the main trunk forked, angling the lens toward the front door and the living room beyond. I pulled up the app on my phone. The feed came through clean and sharp. I could see the entire room, the couch, the side table, the anniversary photograph on the wall. I stood up, took one long look around the apartment, and walked out. I locked the door behind me. The drive to Daniel's house took 14 minutes. I know that because I watched the clock on the dashboard the entire way. Not because I was in a hurry, but because I needed something concrete to focus on. Numbers, distance, time. The things that did not lie or forge documents or smile with their mouth while their eyes stayed cold and empty. 14 minutes, 8.3 miles. 35 years of a man's working life dismantled over 11 months by someone he had trusted completely. Daniel lived in Westerville, a quiet suburb north of Columbus, in a 2-story colonial he and his wife Sandra had bought 6 years ago when Logan was still in high school. It was a solid house, well-maintained, the kind of place where the gutters got cleaned every fall and the driveway got sealed every 3 years. My son had inherited the habit of taking care of things. I had always been proud of that. The porch light was on when I pulled up. Logan had called ahead. Daniel opened the door before I reached the top step. He was 41 years old, built like me through the shoulders, with the same tendency to go quiet when something was wrong, rather than fill the silence with noise. He took one look at my face and stepped aside without a word, holding the door open the way you hold a door for someone who is carrying something heavy. "Logan told me enough," he said once I was inside. "You don't have to explain tonight if you don't want to." "I'm all right," I said, which was not entirely true, but was the best I could manage. Sandra appeared from the kitchen with a mug of coffee she pressed into my hands without asking whether I wanted it. She was a practical woman, Sandra, a nurse for 20 years, accustomed to people in shock who did not yet know they were in shock. The coffee was strong and hot, and I wrapped both hands around the mug and stood in my son's hallway feeling 60 years old in every joint. We sat in the living room, Daniel and Sandra on the couch, Logan in the armchair with his laptop open, and me in the wide chair by the window that looked out onto the darkened front yard. Logan had the camera app pulled up on his screen, the feed from my apartment showing the empty living room, the lamp on the side table casting its usual soft light, the anniversary photograph on the wall, the ficus in the corner with its secret. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly the way it always looked on a Tuesday evening when I was home alone and Eleanor was out. The difference was that Eleanor did not know I was not home. We did not talk much. Sandra refilled my coffee once. Daniel sat with his forearms on his knees staring at the floor, the way he did when he was processing something. Logan watched his screen with the focused patience of someone who had already done the hard emotional work of this situation and was now simply waiting for the evidence to confirm what he already knew. Around 9 o'clock, Eleanor texted me, still at the meeting running late. "Don't wait up." I stared at the message for a long moment. The casual intimacy of it, the easy practice lie dropped into our conversation like a pebble into a pond. No hesitation, no wait. Don't wait up. As though she were simply a busy woman with a full schedule, as though the only thing happening tonight was a charity board meeting running long. I typed back, "No problem. Drive safe." The same words I had said 100 times. She would not notice anything different. That was the point. Daniel looked over when my phone buzzed. "Eleanor." "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly and looked back at the floor. Logan glanced up from his laptop. She'll move within the next couple of hours, I'd guess. She'll want to be home before midnight, so nothing looks out of the ordinary. I set my phone face down on the arm of the chair. Outside the Westerville street was quiet, the neighbor's sprinkler system running in the dark, a dog somewhere down the block barking twice, and then going silent. Ordinary Tuesday night sounds in an ordinary neighborhood. The kind of sounds I had fallen asleep to for 30 years, without ever thinking about how much I was taking for granted. I thought about the lockbox in the bedroom closet. I had moved it that evening before. Placing the camera transferred the deed and the important documents to my briefcase, which was now in the trunk of my car. It was a small thing, a precaution Logan had suggested, but it had felt significant. Taking back the one piece of paper that represented everything. The minutes moved slowly. Daniel made himself a glass of water and drank it standing in the kitchen doorway. Sandra went to bed around 10, squeezing my shoulder on her way past and telling me she would leave the guest room light on. Logan stayed at his laptop, his face lit blue-white by the screen, watching my empty living room with the steady attention of a young man who understood that some things required you to simply hold your position and wait. At 11:47, Logan sat up straighter. "Grandpa," he said quietly. I was out of the chair before he finished the word. On the laptop screen, the front door of my apartment was opening. Logan angled the laptop toward me without a word. The feed was sharp and clear, the night vision rendering everything in crisp detail. Eleanor came through the door, first still in the dark blazer she had worn when she left 6 hours ago, her good leather purse over one shoulder. She moved with the ease of a woman arriving home after a long evening, reaching back without looking to push the door wider. Julian Mercer followed her in. I had seen his face in a grainy parking garage still. Seeing him move was different. He was tall, mid-30s, with the kind of build that came from a gym membership, and enough leisure time to use it. He wore a dark sport coat over a fitted shirt collar, open hair, just so. He walked into my apartment the way you walk into a room you have been in before, without the slight hesitation a person shows in an unfamiliar space. No pause at the threshold, no glance around to take in the layout. He went straight to the side table by the couch and set his keys down on it, right next to the ceramic bowl where I had kept my own keys for 22 years. My stomach turned over hard. "Grandpa!" Logan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Breathe." I realized I had stopped. Eleanor dropped her purse on the couch and said something to Julian that the camera's audio did not capture, clearly too low and too far from the lens. He laughed in response, a short, comfortable laugh, the laugh of a man completely at ease, and moved toward the kitchen. I watched him open my refrigerator, pull out a bottle of the craft beer I kept on the bottom shelf, and twist off the cap against the counter edge the way you do when you know exactly where the bottle opener is, but cannot be bothered to get it. He had been here enough times to know where I kept the beer. He had been here enough times to have opinions about which counter edge worked best. Daniel had come to stand behind us. I heard his sharp intake of breath when Julian opened the refrigerator. "That's enough," Daniel said low and tight. "No," Logan said quietly. "We watch all of it." On screen, Eleanor reappeared from the hallway, carrying 2 wine glasses, the good ones from the cabinet above the dishwasher, the crystal set we had received as a wedding gift 25 years ago and only brought out for company. She set them on the coffee table, and Julian came from the kitchen with his beer and her wine, and they settled onto my couch together, close in the unhurried way of people who had settled onto that couch together many times before. The wine glasses caught the lamplight. I watched Eleanor tuck her feet up beneath her and lean into Julian's shoulder. He rested his arm around her with the automatic ease of long habit, no thought in the gesture, no self-consciousness. His thumb moved in a small idle arc against her shoulder. I had done that same gesture. 20 years ago, on that same couch watching television on a Friday night, my thumb making that same small arc. My chest felt like something structural had given way inside it. "There," Logan said softly. Julian had set down his beer and stood up. He walked to the hall closet, the one just inside the front door, where I kept my work coats and a few older jackets. He pulled it open and stood there for a moment, browsing the way you browse your own closet on a cool evening. Then he reached in and took out the navy jacket. It was my oldest good jacket. I had bought it the week I signed my first major independent contract, 30 years ago, a structural assessment for a commercial development in Dublin, Ohio. It was the jacket I wore to every significant professional meeting, afterward, every project kickoff, every milestone. Eleanor had teased me about it for years, called it my lucky jacket, told me I should retire it. I had kept it because some things you keep, not for their utility, but for what they mean. Julian Mercer shrugged it on, over his sport coat. It was slightly large across the shoulders, the sleeves a half-inch too long. He turned to Eleanor and spread his arms in a theatrical "well, how do I look" gesture. She laughed, reaching up to adjust the collar, her fingers smoothing the lapel, with a familiarity that cut deeper than anything I had watched so far. Not because of what she was doing, because of the look on her face while she did it. She was happy. Genuinely, openly happy in a way I had not seen directed at me in longer than I could accurately remember. I stepped back from the laptop. My legs did not feel entirely reliable. Daniel caught my arm. "Dad, I'm all right." I was not all right. My vision had gone strange at the edges, the room too bright. The carpet under my feet suddenly unfamiliar. "I'm all right." Logan looked up at me, his young face tight with a grief he was working hard to contain on my behalf. "We have enough," he said. "The cloud is recording. We have everything we need." I nodded, my jaw ached. My hands, those thick-knuckled hands that had spent 35 years building things, were shaking at my sides in a way I could not make stop. "Close it," I said. Logan closed the laptop. The room was very quiet. The sprinkler system had stopped outside. The dog down the block had gone to sleep. It was nearly midnight in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, and I was standing in my son's living room, understanding for the first time with absolute certainty that my marriage was not something that had been failing. It was something that had already ended, long before tonight, long before I had any idea. "Okay," I said finally. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Tell me the next step." Logan opened his laptop again, but this time he was not looking at the camera feed. He pulled up a document he had clearly prepared in advance, a numbered list clean, and organized the kind of thing you made when you needed to think clearly under pressure and did not trust yourself to remember the order of operations in the moment. He turned the screen toward me, and I read down the list while Daniel stood at my shoulder doing the same. "We start with the bank," Logan said. "Tonight, right now." He was right that it had to be immediate. Eleanor and Julian were in my apartment at that moment, possibly looking through the bedroom closet for the lockbox that was no longer there, possibly reviewing the property transfer document, possibly making whatever final arrangements they had planned. Every hour we waited was an hour they had to move money file paperwork or cover tracks. "Most major banks operate a 24-hour fraud and account security line," Logan said. "Not the general customer service number, the specific security line. You identify yourself as the primary account holder, and you report suspected unauthorized transactions and request an immediate account freeze. They will ask you security questions. They will ask you to describe the suspicious activity. You tell them about the transfers to the external account, the pattern over 11 months, the amounts. You do not need a police report to initiate a freeze. The bank can act unilaterally to protect the account the moment you report suspected fraud." I reached for my phone. "Wait," Logan said. He slid a handwritten page across the coffee table. "I wrote down the direct security line for your bank, the account numbers, and the transaction dates and amounts I found in the statements. Read from this. It'll be faster, and you won't have to remember anything under pressure." I looked at the page. Every number was there, every date, every flagged transaction amount, organized in the order the bank's automated system would most likely request them. My grandson had prepared for this conversation before he walked through my front door tonight. He had come to my apartment not just with evidence, but with a rescue plan fully assembled, waiting for the moment I was ready to use it. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger this time. I dialed the number. The security line picked up on the second ring. The representative who answered had the calm, professional manner of someone trained to handle distressed account holders at 2 a.m. without making them feel worse than they already did. I worked through Logan's list, methodically giving dates and amounts, describing the pattern of transfers to the external routing number, identifying myself with my account credentials, and the security questions I had set up years ago and never expected to need. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch with his forearms on his knees listening. Logan watched me steadily, ready to point to the next item on the list if I lost my place. The representative confirmed the suspicious transactions I had described, verified my identity through 3 separate security checks, and then told me the words I had been waiting to hear. Mr. Vance, I am placing an immediate hold on all outgoing transactions from both the checking and savings accounts effective right now. No funds can be transferred, withdrawn, or applied to any external account until you authorize the hold to be lifted in person at a branch with valid identification. You will also receive a case number for your records. Would you like me to flag the account for escalation to our fraud investigation team? Yes, I said. Please. When I ended the call, the room felt different. Not lighter exactly, but different. Like the moment after you identify the source of a structural failure and understand that the bleeding at least has stopped. Good, Logan said. He took the handwritten page back and drew a clean line through the first item. Next is the credit cards. Same process, different number. Sandra appeared in the hallway doorway in her robe drawn by the voices at this hour. Daniel caught her eye and gave a small nod that seemed to communicate more than words would have. She went to the kitchen and came back with a plate of toast, set it on the coffee table without comment, and sat in the corner chair to wait. The credit card security call took 11 minutes. The backup card Eleanor had used for the travel booking and the restaurant charges was flagged, the account frozen, and a dispute initiated for the travel charge that Logan had identified as having been funded through the unauthorized savings transfer. Under the Fair Credit Billing Act, I had the right as the primary cardholder to dispute any charge I had not personally authorized, and the representative walked me through the formal dispute process with the same unhurried competence as the first call. When that call ended, Logan drew a second line through his list. Now, the attorney, he said. He glanced at the time on his laptop. I know it's late. I'm going to send an email to the family attorney. I looked up last week with the evidence summary I prepared, and a request for an emergency consultation first thing in the morning. You don't need to do anything on that one tonight, except authorize me to send it on your behalf. Send it, I said. He typed for several minutes, his fingers moving fast. While Daniel ate a piece of toast, and I sat with my hands wrapped around the coffee mug, Sandra had quietly refilled at some point without my noticing. Done, Logan said. He drew a third line through the list. Then he looked up at me. Grandpa, there are two more items, the police report and the property recorder's office. Those have to wait until morning when they open. But everything that could move tonight has been stopped. I sat back in the chair. Outside it was fully dark and fully quiet, the deep stillness of a suburb past midnight. Somewhere in my apartment across the city, Eleanor and Julian were still there, going through whatever they had come to do, entirely unaware that every financial door they had been counting on had just been locked from the other side. She'll figure it out in the morning, Daniel said quietly, when the cards don't work. Yes, Logan said. She will. He closed the laptop and looked at me. Which is why we need to move fast tomorrow. Can you sleep, Grandpa? I almost laughed. Try, he said firmly in a voice so much like his father's that it stopped me cold. You need to be sharp tomorrow. All of this only works if you hold together. I set down the mug and pushed myself up from the chair. Guest room, I asked Sandra. Top of the stairs, first door on the left, she said. Towels are on the bed. I walked up the stairs, slowly, one hand on the rail. Behind me, I heard Logan quietly outline the morning schedule to Daniel, his voice low and steady and precise. I heard him mention the Columbus Division of Police online fraud portal, heard Daniel confirm the web address. Logan would not sleep until every item on his list had a line through it. I closed the guest room door and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. $19,400, 25 years. A navy jacket that had been with me since before Eleanor and I had spoken our first word to each other. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and breathed. Then I lay down and I waited for morning. Morning came the way it always does after a night you do not sleep through, not with any particular grace. Just gray light pressing through the gap in the curtains, the sound of Daniel's coffee maker starting its cycle downstairs, the particular stillness of a house where someone else's family is still asleep, and you are the only one lying awake staring at the ceiling, with your shoes still on. I had not meant to keep my shoes on. I had sat on the edge of the guest bed and simply never gotten around to taking them off. I came downstairs at 6:15. Logan was already at the kitchen table laptop, open coffee in hand, dressed and ready as though he had not slept either or had slept 3 hours and decided that was sufficient. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. She left the building at 7:52 last night, he said. I checked the entry log this morning. Julian left 4 minutes after her. They were in the apartment for just under 2 hours. I poured myself coffee and stood at the counter drinking it. The lockbox was gone when she got there, I said. It was not a question. I had moved it the previous evening before placing the camera. There's no way to know exactly what she found or didn't find, Logan said. But the deed and the important documents are in your briefcase in your trunk. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't get it. That was something. Not much, but something. We drove to the apartment at 8:30 after Logan confirmed through the building's entry log that Eleanor's key fob had not registered since the previous night. Her car was not in the garage. She had gone to work or gone somewhere carrying whatever she had managed to take from 2 hours of searching an apartment whose most important contents had already been removed. The condo felt different when I unlocked the door. I do not know exactly how to describe it. The furniture was the same. The light came through the windows at the same angle it always did on a Wednesday morning. The ceramic bowl on the side table where I kept my keys was still there. But the apartment felt like a place I was visiting, rather than a place I lived the way a job site feels after the crew is cleared out. And the building is technically finished, but not yet occupied. Present, but not inhabited. Complete, but not alive. Logan went straight to the ficus in the corner. He crouched down, parted the branches carefully, and retrieved the camera with the practiced efficiency of someone dismantling something he had built. He checked the device, confirmed the cloud recording was intact, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I walked through the rooms. I did not go looking for evidence of what had happened the previous night. I did not need to. But I noticed things the way you notice things when you are paying attention for the first time in a long time. The crystal wine glasses were back in the cabinet, washed and replaced as though they had never been used. Julian's beer bottle was gone from the recycling bin. The hall closet door was not quite latched the way I always latched it. My navy jacket was back on its hanger. I stood in front of the open closet for a long moment looking at it. Someone had put it back, smoothed the shoulders, straightened the collar, hung it exactly where it had been. As though it had never been touched, as though the previous night had never happened. I reached in and took the jacket off the hanger. I folded it carefully, tucked it under my arm, and carried it to the bag I was packing. Some things you do not leave behind. I moved through the bedroom, methodically taking what I needed. Work clothes, personal documents from the nightstand, drawer the photograph from my mother's house that I kept on the dresser, a small frame picture of Daniel at his college graduation that had lived on the bedroom bookshelf for 15 years. I packed deliberately without rushing the way you pack when you know you are not coming back. Logan appeared in the doorway. "How are you doing, Brastis?" "Finishing up," I said. He watched me fold a shirt and set it in the bag. "The attorney's office called this morning. They can see you at 10. "Good. And I filed the online report with the Columbus Division of Police Fraud Unit last night before I went to sleep," he said. "They'll want a follow-up interview probably this week. The detective assigned to financial crimes cases will contact you directly." I zipped the bag and lifted it from the bed. The room looked bare in the places where my things had been, the small absences that accumulate into the shape of a departure. I picked up the framed graduation photograph and looked at it for a moment. Daniel, at 22, squinting into the sun, diploma in hand, grinning the way young men grin when they believe the best is still entirely ahead of them. I set it carefully on top of the folded navy jacket in the bag. "Ready?" I said. We carried the bags down to the car together, 2 trips the elevator ride quiet between us. When I loaded the last bag into the trunk beside my briefcase, I stood in the parking garage for a moment, looking back at the building entrance. 30 years of mortgage payments. The deed with my name on it safe in my briefcase. The camera footage on Logan's cloud drive. I had walked into this building with nothing but a down payment and 30 years ahead of me. I was walking out with everything that actually mattered, and I was leaving behind everything that had turned out to be hollow. I closed the trunk. "Attorney's office is on North High Street," Logan said, keys in hand. "I'll drive." I looked at my grandson in the flat morning light of the parking garage. 19 years old. A beat-up olive backpack. Dark circles that were starting to fade. "Logan," I said. He looked at me. "Thank you," I said. Just that. 2 words, because some things do not need more than 2 words. He nodded once the way men in our family nodded when something mattered too much for a longer response. We got in the car. The law office of Patricia Holloway was on the 4th floor of a building on North High Street, 2 blocks north of the State House. I had never needed a family attorney before. 25 years of marriage, and I had never once sat in a room like this one with its wall of law books and its view of the Columbus skyline and its box of tissues on the corner of the desk that told you everything you needed to know. about the kinds of conversations that happened here. Patricia Holloway was in her mid-50s, trim and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the manner of someone who had heard a great many difficult stories and had learned to receive them without flinching. Logan had found her through a referral from a colleague of Daniel's. She had reviewed his email summary before we arrived and had a yellow legal pad already covered in notes when she shook my hand across the desk. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I've gone through what your grandson sent me. Before we begin, I want you to know that what you've described, if the documentation supports it, constitutes potential criminal fraud under Ohio law, in addition to the civil family court matters. Those are two separate tracks, and we need to address both." "Tell me what I need to do," I said. She uncapped her pen. "First things first, you've already done the most important thing by freezing the accounts last night. That stops the bleeding. Now we need to formalize the asset protection through the court." She explained that in Ohio, either spouse could petition the domestic relations court for a temporary restraining order on marital assets while divorce proceedings were pending. This was called a temporary protective order for marital assets, and it would legally prohibit Eleanor from transferring, selling, encumbering, or disposing of any jointly held property, including the condo, until the divorce was finalized. "I can file that motion this afternoon," she said. "Given the evidence you have, a judge will grant it, probably within 24 hours. Logan had his notebook open and was writing steadily. "What about the property transfer document she was preparing?" I asked. "The one with the forged signature impression." Patricia's expression sharpened. "That document, combined with the financial transfer pattern you've described, gives us strong grounds for a fraud claim. The forged signature attempt alone is a serious matter. In Ohio, knowingly using a forged instrument to obtain property or financial benefit is a felony under the revised code section 2913.31. The value of the property involved, a paid-off condo in Franklin County, puts this well into felony territory." She paused. "The police report your grandson filed will be the criminal track. My office handles the civil and family court track. Both will run simultaneously." I sat with that for a moment. Felony. The word sat in the room like something with weight. "And the condo itself?" I asked. "Is it protected?" "Once I file the temporary restraining order this afternoon, yes. Nothing can be recorded against that property without court authorization." She set down her pen. "Mr. Vance, I want to be straightforward with you. Ohio is an equitable distribution state. That means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, based on factors including each spouse's contribution to the marriage and any dissipation of assets. Given the documented pattern of unauthorized transfers and the attempted property fraud, a court will look very unfavorably on Eleanor's conduct. It is entirely possible that the final distribution will reflect that." Logan looked up from his notebook. "What does that mean practically?" "It means that in addition to the criminal exposure she faces, Eleanor may end up with significantly less than half of the marital estate," Patricia said. "Possibly considerably less, depending on how the fraud claim develops. I thought about $19,400, about the travel booking charge to my retirement savings, about 41 minutes in my apartment, and a document titled Research Grant Application." "File the restraining order," I said. Patricia nodded and made a note. "I'll need your signature on several documents before you leave today. I'll also need you available for a follow-up meeting later this week when we hear from the financial crimes detective." She looked at me steadily over the top of her reading glasses. "One more thing, Mr. Vance. Does Eleanor know yet that you know?" "No," I said. "Good," she said. "Keep it that way for now." We were back in the elevator 40 minutes later, Logan tucking his notebook into his backpack, me carrying a folder of signed documents that felt both ordinary and enormous in my hands. "She's filing this afternoon," Logan said as the elevator descended. I heard. "By tomorrow morning, Eleanor won't be able to touch the condo or any joint account." He paused. "She's going to figure out something is wrong very soon if she hasn't already. The card stopped working last night. I had thought about that during the meeting. Eleanor would have tried to use a card by now. A coffee, a parking meter, something small. And it would have declined. She was smart enough to know what that meant." "How long before she connects it to me?" I asked. Logan considered. "She'll assume first that it's a bank error. She'll call the number on the back of the card. They'll tell her the account is frozen at the primary holder's request." He glanced at me. "So, a few hours maybe, By this afternoon at the latest. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Through the glass doors, North High Street was busy with midday foot traffic, ordinary Columbus going about its Wednesday. Then we need to move fast on the ticket, I said. Logan was already pulling out his phone. We sat in the car outside the law office, and Logan worked his phone with the focused intensity of someone defusing something. The travel booking Eleanor had made was through a major international carrier, a single reservation under two names, Arthur Vance and Eleanor Vance, round-trip Columbus to Istanbul, with a connection in Newark departing in 6 days. The charge had been applied to the credit card that was now frozen, the transaction flagged as part of the fraud dispute Logan had initiated the previous night through the bank's Fair Credit Billing Act process. The dispute is already in the system, Logan said, scrolling through his phone. The charge is being reversed, which means the payment on this booking is about to become invalid. He looked up. When a ticket's funding source is reversed, the airline has the right to cancel the reservation entirely. I'm going to call the airline's customer relations line and explain the situation before that happens automatically so we can manage what comes next. What does come next? I asked. We buy new tickets, he said simply, under different names. He dialed. The call took 22 minutes. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the lunch crowd move along North High Street, while Logan navigated the airline's customer relations process with a patience and precision that made me wonder, not for the first time, what exactly they were teaching this kid at Ohio State. He explained the fraud dispute calmly and without excessive detail, confirmed the booking cancellation and asked about availability on the same flight. Then he put the phone on hold and turned to me. There are 4 seats available on the same departure, he said. Same flight, same connection in Newark, same arrival in Istanbul. Dad already talked to Sandra this morning while you were meeting with Patricia. They want to come, Grandpa, both of them. They've been wanting to take a trip with you for 2 years, and they have the vacation time. He paused. I already have my passport. I checked. I looked at my grandson in the passenger seat of his 10-year-old Honda Civic, this 19-year-old boy who had spent 3 weeks protecting me and the last 16 hours dismantling a fraud, and was now in the parking space outside a law office on a Wednesday afternoon, casually mentioning that he had checked his passport availability. Something broke open in my chest, not the sharp breaking of the previous night. Something different. Something that felt unexpectedly like relief. Your parents don't have to do that, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I know they don't have to, Logan said. That's not why they're doing it. He held my gaze for a moment, steady and unhurried, then lifted the phone back to his ear. Yes, I'm still here. I'd like to book 4 seats on that departure, please. Daniel and Sandra covered the cost of all 4 tickets without discussion, a fact I learned later that evening, when I tried to raise the subject and Daniel cut me off with a single flat look that reminded me so precisely of the way my own father used to end conversations that I did not bring it up again. Logan handled the booking details, the seat assignments, the passport information, the confirmation emails forwarded to each of us. By 3 in the afternoon, it was done. 4 seats. Arthur Vance, Daniel Vance, Sandra Vance, Logan Vance. Departing Columbus in 6 days. Eleanor's name was nowhere on the reservation. I sat with that fact for a while. The trip she had booked as a distraction, funded with money she had taken from me, reframed as a gift to soften me while she finished the work of taking everything else. That trip was now ours. Stripped of her intentions, reassigned to the people who actually meant something, converted from a tool of manipulation into something genuinely worth having. There was a particular satisfaction in that which I had not expected to feel so soon. Late that afternoon, back at Daniel's house, I was sitting at the kitchen table when my phone rang. The number was Eleanor's. I stared at it through 4 full rings, my thumb hovering over the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text arrived. Arthur, something is wrong with the bank account. My card isn't working. Can you call me? I set the phone face down on the table. Logan came in from the living room, glanced at the phone, and read my expression accurately. She found out about the freeze. Just now. He nodded slowly. She'll try a few more times tonight. Then she'll realize it's not a bank error. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Patricia filed the restraining order 2 hours ago. By tomorrow morning, it'll be on record with the court. Eleanor won't be able to touch the condo or any joint asset without a judge's authorization. I looked at the phone lying face down on Daniel's kitchen table. 25 years of a shared life, and it had come to this. A missed call and a text message asking about a frozen bank account, sent by a woman who still did not understand how completely the ground had shifted beneath her. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. 6 days, I said. Logan looked up. Until Istanbul, I said. He allowed himself a small, quiet smile. 6 days, he agreed. The guest room at Daniel's house faced east. I knew this because every morning, for 5 days I was awake, before the sun came up, lying on top of the comforter, with my shoes off, but otherwise dressed watching the darkness on the other side of the curtains go through its gradual transformation. First, the deep black of real night. Then the softening toward gray that happened so slowly you could not catch it moving, only notice that it had moved. Then the pale line at the curtain's edge that meant morning had arrived whether you were ready for it or not. I had spent 35 years waking early. Construction schedules did not accommodate people who needed time to find their footing in the morning. You got up, you went to the site, you assessed what the day required. The habit of early rising was so deep in me by now that it operated independently of circumstance, indifferent to grief or exhaustion, or the specific weight of a situation that did not have a blueprint. What I had not done in 35 years was wake early with nothing to build. That was the particular texture of those 5 days. Not emptiness exactly, more like the sensation you experienced on a job site after the crew had cleared out and the punch list was complete and the building was finished but not yet occupied. Everything in its correct position, everything structurally sound, the work done, and yet the space still carrying the specific waiting quality of something not yet fully inhabited, not yet animated by the ordinary life it had been built to contain. I was finished with one life. I had not yet begun the next one. In the meantime, I counted things. Eleanor called 11 times. I know the exact number because counting gave the restless part of my brain something precise to do a small act of documentation in a situation that had required a great deal of documentation and would require more before it was finished. 11 calls across 5 days. Beginning Wednesday evening, when the frozen account produced its first consequences in her daily life. Escalating Thursday morning, when a visit to the bank branch confirmed that the hold had been placed deliberately and at the request of the account's primary holder. That Thursday morning call I answered. I listened to 12 seconds of Eleanor's voice, tight and controlled, in the register she used when she was furious, and had decided that control was more effective than fury, and then I ended the call without speaking. She called back in 4 minutes. I watched the phone ring and did not touch it. What I felt during those calls was not what I would have predicted. I had expected anger, and the anger was there, a low, persistent heat that had nothing to do with the sharp heat of the first night. I had expected grief, and that was there too, the dull, specific ache of a long thing ending. What I had not expected was the clarity, the sense of seeing for the first time, without the distortion of trust, exactly the shape of what I had been living inside. Her messages changed as the days accumulated. Wednesday was disbelief, the confident assumption that there had been a technical error that a phone call would resolve. Thursday carried the edge of genuine anger, the clipped vowels and compressed sentences of a woman who had encountered an obstacle she had not planned for. Friday, the register dropped, softened, shifted into the warmer frequency I recognized from 2.5 decades of marriage as the one Eleanor deployed, when warmth was the most efficient path to what she needed. I did not return any of them. Patricia Holloway called Thursday afternoon. She reported that Judge Sandra Okafor of the Franklin County Domestic Relations Court had reviewed the evidence summary and signed the temporary protective order within 18 hours of filing. The order was comprehensive. It prohibited Eleanor from any disposition or encumbrance of jointly held marital assets, including the condo, the joint accounts, and any jointly titled vehicle for the duration of the divorce proceedings. A process server had delivered the order to Eleanor that same morning. She'll have had it in her hands before the Friday call, Patricia said. That's probably why the tone changed. She got served and decided warmth was cheaper than a fight, I said. That would be my read, Patricia said. It won't last. Once she has legal counsel, the approach will shift. But for now, let it play out. Don't engage. I had no intention of engaging. Friday afternoon brought Detective Raymond Carver, whose voice on the phone had the particular quality of a man who had conducted enough financial crimes interviews to know that patience extracted more useful information than urgency. He walked me through the same ground Logan had covered, asked clarifying questions about the timeline of the account transfers, the forged document, the key fob entry logs, and the camera footage. I answered each question in the measured way I had learned to answer questions when the stakes were high, giving exactly what was asked, and nothing more, letting the facts speak at their own pace. At the end of the call, Detective Carver told me the case had been formally opened and that Eleanor would receive a request for voluntary interview within the next several days. He explained that the combination of the financial transfer pattern and the forged signature impression constituted sufficient grounds for the investigation to proceed. He was careful not to overpromise outcomes, the mark of a professional who understood that investigations were processes rather than conclusions. When the call ended, Logan looked up from the folder he had been reviewing across Daniel's kitchen table. "How do you feel?" he asked. I sat with the question for a genuine moment before answering, because he deserved a genuine answer rather than the reflexive fine that men of my generation were trained to produce on demand. "Like I spent 30 years on a job site," I said slowly, "and just found out the foundation was poured wrong from the first day. The building is still standing, but I understand now why certain doors never quite hung level, and certain floors always had that slight give in the northwest corner." I paused. "And I understand that knowing that is better than not knowing, even when not knowing felt more comfortable." Logan held my gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "That's about right. The days at Daniel's house found their own rhythm, the way days always did when you stopped fighting their pace and let them move at the speed they intended to move. Sandra cooked in the evenings with the specific generosity of someone who understood that food was one of the more direct routes to a person who was not yet ready to talk about what he was feeling. Pot roast on Thursday, the kind that fell apart at the touch of a fork. Chicken and biscuits on Friday that filled the kitchen with a smell that belonged to some earlier version of my life. A version before I knew what I now knew, a version I was learning to think about, without the ache overrunning everything else. Daniel and I worked on a jigsaw puzzle Saturday afternoon. 2,000 pieces an aerial photograph of Columbus, the city spread out in its flat Midwestern grid, from above the Scioto River, cutting its familiar arc through the middle. We sat at the dining room table for 3 hours, sorting edge pieces from interior pieces, not talking much, finding the specific wordless comfort of a shared task performed beside someone you had known your entire life. There was something in the puzzle that I found genuinely steadying the small, clean logic of it. Every piece had exactly one correct position. You looked, you tried, you found it, or you did not, and tried again. Nothing was ambiguous, nothing required interpretation. I found I was hungry for that kind of problem right now. Logan spent his evenings at the kitchen table, with his laptop monitoring the progress of the legal filings through Patricia's office portal, maintaining the documentation he had been building with the same methodical care he had brought to everything from the beginning. I watched him work sometimes from the armchair in the living room doorway, this 19-year-old boy bent over a screen in his grandfather's son's kitchen, and felt something that was beyond gratitude and not quite adequately described by any word I had available. He had not been asked to do any of this. He had done it because he looked at a situation and decided it was unacceptable and then proceeded to do something about it. That was a quality I recognized. It was the quality I had tried to model my entire working life, the refusal to walk past a structural problem because addressing it was inconvenient. He had learned it somewhere. I chose to believe some of it had come from me. Sunday evening, he looked up from his laptop and said simply, "Bags packed." "Since Friday," I said. He smiled the way he smiled when something satisfied him, a small contained expression that carried more warmth than a larger one would have. That night, I slept better than I had since the Tuesday Eleanor had walked out the door in her dark blazer and given me the first real reason I had ever had to watch her go. Monday arrived gray and cool the early June morning in Columbus that could not decide whether it was still spring or had committed to something else. I stood at Daniel's kitchen window at 5:30 with a mug of coffee watching the neighbor's oak tree move in the low wind coming off the street. Its leaves were fully out now, the deep summer green that made Ohio look like itself, the color that had been the background of every outdoor morning of my life in this city. I thought about the oak tree outside my own building, the one I had planted 22 years ago on an Arbor Day weekend, with a 5-gallon bucket and more optimism than I could fully account for now. I wondered whether it would still be there when the legal process completed and the condo and its contents and the life it represented were finally and formally sorted out. I decided it would. Oaks were stubborn. They did not require the people who planted them in order to continue. They simply kept doing the thing they were built to do, putting down roots and growing outward season after season, indifferent to the human arrangements that shifted around their trunks. That felt on a Monday morning at 5:30 in my son's kitchen, like something worth holding on to. My phone showed no missed calls from Eleanor. Her last message had come Saturday evening, 31 seconds, her voice carrying a flatness I had never heard in it before, stripped of the anger and the warmth and the controlled register of the earlier calls. She did not ask about the account. She did not mention a misunderstanding. She said only, "Arthur, call me when you're ready to talk." And then nothing else for 31 seconds, except the ambient sound of wherever she was, and then the voicemail system cutting the line. I had listened to it once standing in the guest room in the dark, trying to hear in those 31 seconds the woman from the company picnic in the yellow sundress, and finding that I could not locate her there anymore. Then I had deleted it. I rinsed my mug and set it in the drying rack on the left side of the sink, the way Sandra kept her kitchen, and stood for a moment with my hands on the counter, looking out at the oak tree in the early gray light. "Ready." Logan's voice came from the hallway, his backpack already settled on his shoulders, his boarding pass on his phone, 19 years old, and entirely prepared for whatever the day required. I dried my hands on the dish towel. "Ready," I said, and for the first time in 5 days I meant it without qualification. Daniel's SUV held 4 people and 4 bags with room to spare. Sandra had made sandwiches for the drive, wrapped in wax paper, the way her mother had taught her, tucked into a small cooler in the back seat, alongside 4 bottles of water, and a container of the oatmeal cookies she had baked Sunday evening, while Logan and I reviewed the final documents Patricia had sent over. It was such a specific practical act of love that I had to look out the window for a moment when I noticed it. We pulled out of the Westerville driveway at 6:15 in the morning. The drive south toward John Glenn Columbus International Airport took us through the kind of early June morning that Ohio occasionally produced as though to remind you why you stayed. The sky was clear and pale gold at the horizon, the highway quiet. At this hour, the city still in the soft haze of its own waking. I sat in the back seat beside Logan and watched Columbus pass outside the window. I had lived in this city for 60 years. I had driven these highways 10,000 times. I knew the exits by instinct, knew which lanes backed up, at which hours knew the particular way the downtown skyline looked, coming in from the north, on a clear morning, the State House dome catching the early light. I had built things in this city, left my work in its bones. It occurred to me, watching it slide past, that I was not leaving Columbus. I was leaving a version of my life in Columbus. The version that had included Eleanor the condo, the 25 years of a marriage I now understood, had been hollow at its center for longer than I had been willing to see. That version was already gone. It had been gone before I knew it. What remained was the city itself, the oak trees, Daniel's house in Westerville, Logan's dorm room at Ohio State, the job sites I had left standing. Those things were not going anywhere. My phone buzzed, a text from Patricia Holloway. TRO. Confirmed on record as of this morning. All joint assets fully protected. Travel safe, Mr. Vance. I showed it to Logan. He read it and gave a single nod. 10 minutes later, Detective Carver called. "Mr. Vance," he said, "I wanted to let you know we have 2 officers positioned at John Glenn this morning in coordination with airport security. Based on the booking records and her stated travel plans, we expect Mrs. Vance to arrive at the departures level between 8 and 8:30. We'll make contact at that point." A pause. "You don't need to do anything. Just check in normally. We'll handle our end." "Thank you, Detective," I said. When I ended the call, Daniel glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "They're going to be there." 2 officers, I said. "Airport security coordination." Sandra reached back from the front seat and briefly pressed her hand over mine. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Logan was quiet beside me, looking out his own window. He had been quieter than usual this morning, not the focused, purposeful quiet of the past week, but something more contemplative, as though he was processing the distance between what had been set in motion and what was about to happen. I understood the feeling. There was a significant difference between planning something and watching it arrive. "Logan," I said quietly. He turned. "Whatever happens in there," I said, "you did this, all of it. I want you to know I understand that." He looked at me for a moment with those steady dark eyes that had seen too much for 19 years, and handled it better than most men twice his age would have. "You did it, Grandpa," he said. "I just handed you the tools." I shook my head. You built the tools. You brought them to me. You held them steady when my hands were shaking. I paused. That's not nothing. That's everything. He held my gaze a moment longer, then looked back out the window. His jaw worked once the way it did when he was holding something in. Don't make me cry before we even get to the airport, he said. I laughed. A real laugh, sudden and genuine, the first one in what felt like a very long time. Daniel laughed from the front seat. Sandra made a sound that was trying not to be a laugh and failing. The laugh faded and left something cleaner in its place. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the specific lightness that comes when you have been carrying something terrible and the weight has finally genuinely begun to lift. John Glenn Columbus International Airport appeared ahead, the access road curving up toward the departures level. The familiar signs, the steady flow of early morning travelers pulling bags from trunks and moving toward the glass doors with the particular purposeful shuffle of people catching flights. Ordinary Monday morning at an American airport. Except that somewhere in that building, or moving toward it right now through Columbus traffic, Eleanor was getting dressed in whatever she had chosen to wear for a trip she still believed she was taking, pulling her Louis Vuitton suitcase to the door, checking her passport, calling a rideshare because her cards were frozen and she could not use the parking garage app. She was coming. Daniel pulled into the departures lane and stopped. End of the road for me, he said. Curbside drop-off only. I gripped his shoulder from the back seat. He put his hand over mine for a moment, the same gesture Sandra had made on the highway, the family language of people who showed love through touch rather than words. See you in Istanbul, I said. He grinned. Gate B12, don't be late. I got out of the car, into the cool morning air, Logan beside me, Sandra already pulling bags from the trunk, with efficient Sandra energy. The automatic doors of the terminal slid open ahead of us, releasing a breath of recycled air, and the distant sound of departure announcements. I picked up my bag. I walked through the doors. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, and the airport swallowed us whole. John Glenn Columbus International Airport on a Monday morning had a specific kind of energy that I had encountered dozens of times over the years, at the beginning of business trips, at the tail end of holidays, in the gray pre-dawn hours of early departures, when the whole enterprise of human movement felt both essential and slightly absurd. The overhead lights were the color of institutional efficiency. The floor was polished to a shine that reflected the movement of rolling luggage and purposeful feet. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and the particular coffee smell that existed only in airports and nowhere else on Earth, as though some chemist had long ago isolated the compound and licensed it exclusively to terminal concessions. I had always moved through this space with my head down, and my boarding pass ready, the compressed focus of a man with somewhere to be and a flight to catch. This morning was different. Logan fell into step on my left, his olive backpack settled on both shoulders, his hands free. Sandra was on my right, her carry-on rolling, with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had packed light enough that the bag never wobbled. Behind us, somewhere in the flow of Monday travelers, Daniel was navigating the check-in area, with his customary mild impatience toward processes he considered inefficient. I kept my pace steady and my eyes moving. 35 years of walking job sites had given me a habit of scanning spaces the way structural engineers scan spaces methodically and without urgency, looking not for what was there, but for what did not belong. The hairline crack in the corner of a load-bearing wall, the slight unevenness in a finished floor that suggested settling beneath, the thing that looked fine until you knew what you were looking for, and then you could not stop seeing it. I found her near the far end of the check-in row. Eleanor was standing at a self-service kiosk, her back three-quarters turned to us, the Louis Vuitton suitcase she had bought 3 years ago on a Chicago shopping trip, standing upright at her side. She was wearing a deep burgundy blazer over dark tailored slacks, her hair pinned the way she pinned it, when she considered the occasion worth the effort, her posture carrying the particular composed authority of a woman who had decided that today was going to go her way. From where I stood 40 feet away in the Monday morning crowd, she looked exactly as she always looked when she was going somewhere, assembled, deliberate, certain. She had not seen us. I stopped walking. Not because I was uncertain. I had not been uncertain since the night Logan set that folder on my kitchen table, and I looked at the numbers and understood what they meant. I stopped because the moment deserved a second. Because 60 years of living had taught me that some things once set in motion did not come undone. And before I set this one in motion, I wanted to stand still for just a breath and know that I was ready. Logan stopped beside me without a word. He had a gift for reading the precise nature of a pause, for understanding the difference between hesitation and intention. He did not ask what I was looking at or whether I was all right. He simply stopped and waited, because he understood that this moment was mine, and it would begin when I decided it would begin. Sandra stopped a half step behind us. I heard the quiet click of her carry-on wheels going still. 40 feet ahead, Eleanor was pressing something on the kiosk screen with the slightly elevated pressure of a person encountering an unexpected obstacle. I watched her head tilt a fraction. I watched her chin come up, the micro-adjustment of someone whose expectations had just been interrupted by a machine that was not behaving the way it was supposed to behave. The kiosk knew what she did not yet fully accept: that the transaction she had used to purchase her ticket had been reversed through the bank's dispute process, that the reservation under her name was no longer supported by valid payment, that the system could not issue her a boarding pass because there was no longer a ticket to board. She reached into her purse and produced her phone. I watched her thumb move across the screen. I watched her raise the phone to her ear. I watched the moment the call went to voicemail, the almost imperceptible shift in her posture, the controlled absorption of another unexpected variable by a woman who had always been very good at staying composed when things were not going her way. She was calling me. In my jacket pocket, my phone buzzed once, then twice. I did not reach for it. Logan glanced at me from the side, a look that asked nothing and confirmed everything. I breathed in once, slow and even. The way I breathe on job sites when I had just identified the source of a failure and was about to go tell the client something they were not going to want to hear. The breath that preceded the difficult conversation you had been building toward for longer than either party had wanted to admit. "Okay," I said. We started walking again. The check-in area was perhaps 60 feet wide. At this point, a flow of travelers moving in both directions between the kiosks and the counters and the entrance behind us. We covered the distance in perhaps 20 seconds, and in those 20 seconds, I watched Eleanor try the kiosk again, watched her exhale through her nose in a way I had seen 10,000 times over 25 years. The specific exhalation of Eleanor encountering a situation that was not cooperating. We were 30 feet away when she turned from the kiosk to look for a human being to take the problem to. We were 25 feet away when her scanning gaze moved across the terminal in a broad sweep and stopped on me. The moment her eyes found mine, something happened in her face that I had never seen there before. Not in 25 years of mornings and arguments and silences and the 1,000 ordinary Tuesday evenings that made up the texture of a long marriage. It was not the controlled surprise of someone caught doing something they should not be doing. It was something rawer than that, more involuntary, the expression of a person who has been running a calculation and has just realized that a variable they believed they had accounted for has been present all along in a form they did not recognize. She had not expected me to be here. She had expected me to be at Daniel's house, or at Patricia's office, or on the phone, with the bank, doing the things that a man who had discovered what I had discovered would do from a careful distance. She had expected paperwork and phone calls and the slow procedural grind of the legal process working itself out behind closed doors, while she moved through a departure terminal with her hair done and her suitcase packed and the comfortable certainty of a woman who believed the next chapter was already written. She had not written for this. For 3 full seconds, neither of us moved. The airport continued around us, rolling luggage and departure announcements, and a child somewhere behind me asking her father if they could get a pretzel before the flight. The gate agent's voice came over the intercom calling final boarding for a service to Charlotte, and the words floated past me without landing, because all of my attention was on the woman 40 feet away, who was now doing something I had watched her do for a quarter century. Her chin came up, her shoulders squared. She reached for her suitcase handle. Even now, even here in the moment when the ground had already gone from beneath her, Eleanor gathered herself. I had always known she was capable of that. The composure was real, whatever else had been false. She was a woman who could absorb a blow and walk toward the thing that had delivered it, rather than away from it, and I found that I respected that quality, even now, even standing here, even knowing everything I knew. She began walking toward me. Her heels were deliberate, and even on the polished floor, the suitcase rolling behind her, the burgundy blazer carrying the composed authority it had been chosen to carry. She moved through the morning crowd with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had decided that whatever was about to happen, she was going to meet it on her own terms. Beside me, Logan shifted his weight slightly, straightening in the almost imperceptible way of someone who has been waiting for something and has just felt it arrive. Sandra's hand found my elbow for one brief, steady second, and then released the gesture of a woman communicating everything she needed to communicate in a single point of contact. I kept my feet planted. I watched Eleanor cover the distance between us, watched the composure doing its work, the jaw set beneath the controlled expression, the eyes moving between my face and Logan's, with the rapid calibrated assessment of someone calculating how much the other side knew and how much room remained to maneuver. She stopped 4 feet in front of me. Up close, the composure was expensive. I could see what it was costing her in the tightness at the corners of her mouth, and the particular stillness of her hands, the forced quality of the steadiness that in other circumstances I had always admired as simply who she was. She looked at me. I looked at her. At the face I had woken beside for 9,000 mornings. At the woman who had stood next to me at a judge's desk on a Tuesday in October and said yes to a question she had apparently later reconsidered. At the person who had looked at the life I had spent 35 years building and had decided it was a resource to be accessed rather than a foundation to be shared. For a moment, across 4 feet of polished airport floor, we were simply two people at the end of something long. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was impressively steady. "I think we need to talk." I looked at her for one long moment more, at the burgundy blazer and the Louis Vuitton suitcase, and the 25 years and the navy jacket folded in my bag, and Logan standing at my left shoulder with everything he had done and everything he had been willing to carry for me. "Yes," I said. I let the words sit between us exactly as long as it needed to. "We do." Eleanor glanced at Logan, then back at me. "Why is he here?" she asked. The question was directed at me, but her eyes stayed on Logan doing the rapid recalculation of someone who had just understood that the variable she had not accounted for was not an accident. "He's family," I said. "He's here because I asked him to be." Something moved through her expression at that, not guilt. Eleanor had always been too practical for guilt. It was closer to the look of a contractor who had just realized the inspector was going to be thorough. "Arthur." She shifted her weight repositioning for a different approach. "Whatever you think is going on, there are things you don't understand. If you would just give me 10 minutes to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said. "But there is something to show you." I nodded to Logan. He stepped forward and set his tablet on the check-in counter beside us, angling the screen toward Eleanor, with the calm deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his head many times and had decided that quiet was more powerful than dramatic. The screen displayed a split view. On the left, the camera footage from the ficus. Timestamp 12:15 in the morning. Eleanor and Julian entering the apartment together. On the right, a column of financial transactions, dates and amounts and account numbers highlighted in yellow, the way Logan highlighted everything neat and precise and impossible to dismiss. Eleanor looked at the screen. For 3 full seconds she did not move. Her face did not change. She was processing the way very controlled people process internally and invisibly, giving nothing away to the room. Then she looked up at me. "That is private property," she said. "Whatever you recorded in that apartment, you had no right." "I had every right," I said. "It is my apartment. My name is on the deed. Under Ohio law, the property owner may record within their own residence without the knowledge or consent of other parties present, provided the owner is one party to any communication being recorded. I was the owner. I consented. The recording is entirely legal." I had not planned to deliver that paragraph. It came out clean and complete because I had listened to Logan explain it 4 times over the past week, and it had settled into me the way solid information settles when you have had time to absorb it properly. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous. You are not a lawyer, Arthur." "No," I said, "but I have one." Patricia Holloway filed a temporary protective order on all joint marital assets with the Franklin County Domestic Relations Court 6 days ago. It was granted within 18 hours and served to you by a process server last Thursday morning. The order is on record. The condo is protected. The accounts are frozen. The property transfer document you drafted, the one you titled Research Grant Application, and attempted to have me sign, without my knowledge, has been submitted to the Columbus Division of Police Financial Crimes Unit as evidence of attempted fraud. Each sentence landed in the space between us like something solid being set down on a table. Eleanor's composure was doing extraordinary work. I could see the effort of it in the set of her shoulders, the controlled evenness of her breathing, the way her hands stayed still at her sides when every instinct must have been telling them to move. She was a capable woman. She had always been a capable woman. She had simply aimed that capability in a direction I had been too trusting to look. "You want to make a scene," she said, lowering her voice. "Here, in public, in front of all these people." She glanced around the check-in area where several travelers had slowed their pace, carrying ons, rolling to a gradual stop, the way people slowed when they sensed that something real was happening nearby. "This is humiliating, Arthur." "Eleanor," I said, and I kept my voice quiet not because I was uncertain, but because the situation did not require volume. "I am not trying to humiliate you. I am telling you what has already happened so that you understand where things stand." Logan reached into his backpack and produced a manila envelope. He set it on the counter beside the tablet. "This is a copy of the financial documentation, the property transfer draft, the key fob entry logs, and the cloud recording confirmation," he said, addressing Eleanor directly for the first time. His voice was steady, and even without triumph, without anger, just a 19-year-old man stating facts to a woman who had tried to rob his grandfather. "The originals are with Patricia Holloway's office and the police department. This copy is for you so that you and your attorney can begin reviewing the situation." Eleanor looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Logan with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something that was not quite rage and not quite fear, but contained elements of both the particular combustible mixture of a person who had believed themselves to be the smartest person in the room, and had just discovered they were not. "You did this," she said to him. Her voice had lost its controlled register. The edges of it were fraying. "You are a child. You had no right to involve yourself in—" "He had every right," I said. My voice came out harder than it had been, and I did not pull it back. "He is my family. He was protecting me. That is what family does." Eleanor turned back to me. Her chin was still up, but the composure was fracturing now, the performance giving way to something rawer underneath. Her eyes were bright in the way that could mean tears or fury, or both simultaneously. 25 years, Arthur," she said. "You are going to throw away 25 years because of a boy with a laptop and a grudge." "I am not throwing away 25 years, I said. "I am acknowledging that they ended. The only question is when. And I think we both know the answer to that is not recently." She opened her mouth. She closed it. Behind her, two figures in uniform were moving through the check-in area with the specific unhurried purposefulness of law enforcement that has already determined its destination. One of them was a Columbus police officer in a standard uniform. The other was a plainclothes detective I recognized from the photograph Detective Carver had sent to my phone the previous day as a courtesy, so I would know who to expect. Eleanor heard them before she saw them, registering the shift in my focus and turning to look. When she turned back, the last of the composure had gone. Her face was open now, in a way I had never seen it stripped of the performance, showing something underneath that looked very much like a woman finally understanding the full dimensions of what she had done and what it was going to cost her. "Arthur," she said. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Please." I looked at her. At the face that had smiled at me 10,000 times, only some of those smiles real, and I found that what I felt in that moment was not satisfaction and not grief and not anger. It was something quieter and more final than any of those. It was the feeling of a door closing gently but completely. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor," I said. I picked up my bag. Logan was already beside me. Sandra appeared at my other shoulder, her carry-on rolling steadily, her expression calm and certain. The detective reached Eleanor as we turned away. I did not look back. The security line at John Glenn moved the way security lines always moved. Slowly then, all at once, then slowly again. You took off your shoes and put them in the gray bin and watched them disappear into the scanner, and you stood in the line of ordinary Monday morning travelers, and you waited for the machine to decide you were not a threat. And the whole time, the world kept going at exactly the same pace it had always gone, indifferent to whatever had just happened, 40 feet behind you at a check-in counter. I found that steadying. The TSA officer who checked my boarding pass and passport was a heavy-set man in his 50s with reading glasses on a chain around his neck and the practiced efficiency of someone who had looked at 10,000 faces and learned to see them without really seeing them. He glanced at my passport photograph, glanced at my face, handed the documents back. "Have a good flight, sir," he said. "Thank you," I said. "I intend to." I meant it. Logan was directly behind me, backpack in the bin, shoes off, moving through the process, with the ease of a young man who traveled light and thought ahead. Sandra was behind him, organized as always, her carry-on already unzipped to the laptop pocket. I waited for them on the other side of the scanner, collecting my shoes and my belt and my watch, the small reassembly of yourself that airports required. Daniel appeared through the scanner a moment later, shaking his head at the bin situation the way he always did, some private ongoing argument with the concept of removing shoes in public that he never quite won. "Gate B12, Logan said, reading his phone. 40 minutes to boarding." We walked the concourse together. I had walked this concourse dozens of times over the years. Business trips, the occasional vacation, the drive to drop off or pick up. It was a familiar space, the low hum of the ventilation system, the moving walkways, the particular smell of airport coffee that was somehow universally distinct from coffee anywhere else. I had always moved through it with the slightly compressed attention of someone with somewhere to be. This morning, I walked it differently. I noticed the light coming through the high windows at the end of the B concourse, the way it fell across the polished floor in long, pale rectangles. I noticed a young couple sitting against the wall near gate B7, their heads together over a shared phone screen laughing at something. I noticed an older man traveling alone, his carry-on between his feet, a paperback open in his lap, reading with the focused contentment of someone who had learned to be comfortable in his own company. I thought that will be me someday, and the thought did not frighten me the way it would have frightened me a week ago. At gate B12, we found 4 seats together near the window. The tarmac spread out below ground crews moving around a wide-body aircraft in the early morning light, the practiced choreography of departure preparation. Logan plugged his phone into a charging station. Sandra produced the wax paper sandwiches from her carry-on and distributed them without asking whether anyone was hungry, which was the correct decision, because none of us would have said yes, and all of us needed to eat. I sat with the sandwich in my hands and looked out at the tarmac and let the morning settle around me. My phone buzzed, a text from Patricia Holloway. Eleanor was taken in for formal questioning this morning at the airport. Julian Mercer received a voluntary interview request from the Financial Crimes Unit and has retained an attorney. Process is moving. You don't need to do anything today except get on your flight. I'll be in touch. I read it twice, then showed it to Logan. He read it, nodded once, and looked back out the window. "It's done," he said. "The beginning of done," I said. "There's still a lot of process ahead." "There is," he agreed. "But the part where she could still take something from you, that part is done." I thought about that, about the specific distinction he was drawing. The legal process would take months, possibly longer. The divorce proceedings, the fraud investigation, the financial accounting of what had been taken and what could be recovered. None of that was finished. None of it would be finished for a long time. But Logan was right about the other thing. The part where Eleanor could act against me without my knowledge, where she could move money and draft documents and hand keys to strangers while I drove to job sites in Dayton and trusted that the foundation was holding. That part was over. The moment the accounts froze and the restraining order landed and the police case opened, that part ended. She had no more moves available that I had not already anticipated and countered. I was no longer the man who did not know. I took a bite of the sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on sourdough. Sandra's standard, the mustard to mayo ratio, exactly right. In the way that only happened when someone had been making the same sandwich for years, because they knew it was what the people they loved preferred. Daniel was reading something on his phone. Sandra was looking out the window at the tarmac. Logan had his headphones around his neck, but was not using them, his eyes half closed in the particular posture of someone allowing themselves finally to rest. I watched my family in the Gate B12 waiting area of John Glenn Columbus International Airport on a Monday morning in early June and felt something move through my chest that I had not felt in so long that it took me a moment to identify it. I had spent 25 years married to a woman who had treated my trust as a resource to be harvested. These people treated it as something worth protecting. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. I had just been looking in the wrong direction to see it clearly. The gate agent's voice came over the speaker, announcing pre-boarding for passengers requiring additional assistance. Logan opened his eyes. Almost time. Almost time. I agreed. I pulled out my boarding pass and held it in my hand. Arthur James Vance, seat 24, A. Columbus, to Newark to Istanbul. A trip that had been booked as a distraction, redeemed as something else entirely. I thought about Eleanor for a moment, not with anger, not with grief exactly, with something more like the feeling you had when you walked away from a building you had spent years working on and finally accepted that it could not be saved. Structural compromise too deep, too pervasive, too long, ignored. Sometimes you documented the damage, secured the site, and walked away. Sometimes that was the only responsible thing left to do. I had documented the damage. I had secured the site. Now I was walking away. A ground crew member below the window gave a signal to the aircraft, and the jet bridge began to extend toward the plane's forward door, closing the distance between the terminal and the aircraft, with the slow mechanical certainty of a thing that had been designed to connect. I watched it reach its destination and lock into place. Grandpa. Logan was standing, backpack on his shoulders, boarding pass in hand, watching me with an expression that held everything the past week had been and the lightness of what was still ahead. I stood up. I picked up my bag. "Let's go," I said. The flight from Newark to Istanbul took 11 hours. I slept for 4 of them, which was more than I had slept in a single stretch in the past 2 weeks. I woke somewhere over the Atlantic, the cabin dark and quiet around me, Logan asleep in the seat beside me, with his head tilted back and his mouth slightly open, the way he had slept as a small child, when Daniel used to bring him over on Sunday afternoons, and he would fall asleep on my living room floor with his shoes still on. I sat in the dark of the aircraft and listened to the engines and felt the particular stillness that came from being suspended between places. Neither here nor there, not yet arrived. I thought about Eleanor. I had been avoiding the thought for days, managing it, the way you managed a structural assessment methodically in controlled segments, never allowing the full weight of it to land all at once. But in the quiet dark of the aircraft over the Atlantic, with Logan sleeping beside me and Daniel and Sandra somewhere in the rows behind, I let it come. 25 years. I had loved her. I wanted to be clear about that, at least to myself in the dark where no one else could hear. Whatever she had become, whatever she had been doing behind the careful architecture of our shared life, I had loved her. The woman at the company picnic in the yellow sundress, the woman who had stood beside me in a judge's office on a Tuesday afternoon in October, because we had not wanted a fuss, just the fact of it, just the official beginning. The woman who had laughed on a hiking trail in the Smoky Mountains with the sun in her eyes. I did not know when she had stopped being that woman, or whether that woman had ever fully been real. I suspected the truth was somewhere in between, that she had been real in the beginning and had changed by degrees so gradual that neither of us had marked the turning point. Or perhaps I had marked it and chosen not to look directly at it, the way you sometimes drove past a building you knew was in trouble and told yourself the cracks were settling, normal, nothing structural, because the alternative required action you were not yet ready to take. I had been a builder my whole life. I should have known that deferred maintenance was always more expensive than early intervention, but you could not go back and re-engineer the past. You could only assess the current condition, document the damage, and decide what to do with what remained. What remained was considerable. I thought about the deed to the condo safe in my briefcase in the overhead compartment. The retirement accounts diminished but recoverable according to Patricia. The navy jacket folded in my checked bag going to Istanbul. The photograph of Daniel at his college graduation. Logan's olive green backpack in the overhead compartment beside my briefcase stuffed with whatever 19-year-olds stuffed their bags with when they were going to Turkey on a week's notice because their grandfather needed them. What remained was the things that had always mattered and the clarity to see them plainly. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the cabin lights were coming up and the flight attendants were moving through the aisles and out the window. The sky was turning from black to a deep luminous blue, and somewhere below us, still invisible but drawing closer, was Turkey. We landed at Istanbul Airport in the middle of the morning, local time, the city already fully awake beneath a sky of startling clarity, the kind of blue that made you understand why people had been painting this sky for 3,000 years. I stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal and felt the air change around me, warmer and somehow more textured than Columbus air, carrying something I could not name the weight of a place that had been continuously inhabited since before anyone I knew had been born. Logan appeared beside me, backpack on, eyes wide, with the particular alertness of someone who had slept on a plane and woken up in a different country. "Look at that light," he said. I looked. The terminal windows faced east, and the morning sun was coming through them at an angle that turned everything gold: the floors, the moving walkways, the faces of the travelers moving past. It was the kind of light that made ordinary things look significant. "Yeah," I said. The hotel was on the European side of the city, a 20-minute taxi ride from the airport, through streets that felt like they had been arranged by someone with a different theory of geometry than the one I was accustomed to. Narrow roads opening suddenly onto broad boulevards, ancient walls standing beside modern apartment buildings, minarets rising above neighborhoods of red-roofed houses. I sat in the back of the taxi and watched it all go past, and felt something in my chest that I could only describe as the sensation of being reminded that the world was very large and had been going on for a very long time, and would continue going on regardless of what happened at a check-in counter in Columbus, Ohio. That was not a diminishment. It was a relief. The hotel room had a balcony. Logan discovered this approximately 4 seconds after the bellman left, and threw the doors open with the enthusiasm of someone who had never had a balcony before and intended to make the most of this one. The Bosphorus stretched out below, and beyond that famous strait connecting the Black Sea to the Marmara, the water, a deep shifting blue-green that changed color as clouds moved across the sun. On the far shore, the Asian side of the city climbed up from the waterfront in layers of rooftops and greenery. Ferries moved across the water in both directions, white and purposeful, trailing thin lines of wake. I stepped out onto the balcony beside Logan. He was gripping the railing with both hands, leaning slightly forward, taking it in with the full physical attention of someone encountering something genuinely new. I stood beside him and looked out at the water and the city and the sky. For a long time, neither of us spoke because the view was the kind that made conversation feel unnecessary. And we were both people who understood the value of not filling silence that did not need to be filled. Then Logan said, "How are you doing, actually?" I considered the question honestly the way he deserved. "I am 60 years old," I said. "I have a paid-off condo in Columbus, Ohio that belongs to me entirely. I have a grandson who spent 3 weeks protecting me before I even knew I needed protecting. I have a son who booked a plane ticket to Istanbul without asking me whether I was all right with it, which is exactly what I would have done in his position." I paused. "I have a fraud case working its way through the Columbus legal system, and a divorce that will take the better part of a year to finalize, and a retirement account that needs rebuilding." I looked out at the Bosphorus, and I am standing on a balcony in Istanbul watching ferries cross a strait that has been here for 10,000 years. Logan turned to look at me. "That sounds like a lot," he said. "It is a lot," I said. "But it is the right kind of a lot. It is a lot that is moving in the right direction." He nodded slowly, satisfied with that answer, in the way that thoughtful people were satisfied when they received an honest one. Behind us, the hotel room door opened and Daniel appeared, coffee in hand. Sandra beside him, both of them having apparently located the room service menu with the efficiency of people who had been traveling together for 15 years and had the process down. Daniel handed me a coffee without asking the same gesture Sandra had made in the Westerville kitchen a week ago. The family language I had been swimming in my whole life without fully appreciating the fluency of it. I wrapped my hands around the cup and turned back to the water. Patricia Holloway had sent a message while we were in the taxi. Eleanor's formal interview with the Financial Crimes Unit had taken place Monday morning. She had arrived with an attorney. The attorney had, according to Patricia's careful phrasing, recommended cooperation. Julian Mercer's voluntary interview was scheduled for Wednesday. The fraud investigation was proceeding on its established timeline. The divorce filing would be submitted to the Franklin County Domestic Relations Court by end of week. The machinery of consequence was turning slowly and without drama, the way it always turned when the evidence was solid and the documentation was complete. I had built things for 35 years. I knew that the most durable structures were the ones built on honest foundations. You could dress up a compromised footing with finishing work, cover the cracks with compound and paint, present a surface that looked sound to anyone who did not know what to look for. But the load would find the weakness eventually. It always did. Eleanor had built something on a false foundation, and the load had found it. What happened next was not something I had done to her. It was the consequence of the structure she had built, meeting the weight it could not bear. I had simply stopped pretending the cracks were not there. Logan put his arm around my shoulder, not the tentative gesture of a young man uncertain of his welcome, but the easy, unself-conscious reach of someone who knew exactly where he stood and had decided that standing close was the right thing to do. "So," he said, "what do you want to do today?" I looked out at the ferries crossing the Bosphorus, at the minarets catching the morning light, at the ancient city going about its ancient business on both sides of an ageless strait. I thought about 35 years of early mornings and job sites and the satisfying specific weight of honest work. I thought about a yellow sundress at a company picnic, and a payoff letter on a kitchen table, and a navy jacket folded in a bag in a hotel room in Istanbul. I thought about Logan at 19 following a feeling in a parking deck, because it mattered to him that his grandfather was all right. I thought about how much of my life I had spent building things for other people, and how little of it I had spent simply standing somewhere worth standing and looking at what was in front of me. "Nothing yet," I said. "I just want to stand here for a while." Logan nodded. His arm stayed on my shoulder. The Bosphorus moved the way water moved, continuous and indifferent, and endlessly itself, carrying its ferries and its light and its 10,000 years of human crossing from one shore to the other. I stood on the balcony with my coffee and my grandson and let it be exactly what it was. For the first time in longer than I could accurately remember, that was enough. Trust is not weakness, but trust without awareness is the door you leave unlocked. I spent 25 years building a life, and I nearly lost it because I confused comfort with safety. I handed someone the blueprint to everything I had worked for, and never once asked whether they were reading it the same way I was. That was my failure, not my love. My love was real. My blindness was the problem. If you are watching this and something in this family story feels familiar, please hear me. Do not wait the way I waited. Do not dismiss the quiet doubts the way I dismissed them. Family betrayal does not announce itself. It arrives quietly in small transactions and practiced smiles, in patterns you explain away, because the alternative is too painful to face. I am not a man from New York with resources and connections. I am a 60-year-old engineer from Columbus who got lucky because a 19-year-old boy loved him enough to pay attention. God gave me that boy. I do not take that lightly. This family story cost me years. This family betrayal taught me more than any success ever did. And this final act of family betrayal became the beginning of something truer than anything I had built before. If any part of Arthur's story moved, you drop a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories that follow contain some fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and to carry a meaningful message. If that is not the content you are looking for, we completely respect your choice to find something better suited to you.